Welcome back. We have several questions. There's a couple that I've left off the last session, and I'm going to go over those primarily around Parkinson's, and I've combined some on the diabetes side of it also. But I really do appreciate these questions, and they're very appropriate to your general health. And I'm going to try to speak in terms of both, not just ValAsta, but also in how to improve general health and things to watch out for. The first question is from Dawn. Says we've been taking ValAsta since summer of 2019 and advocating its use with all who listen and research further. My husband's mom, now 85, refused chemo after surgical removal of stage 3 colon cancer and chose to take astaxanthin instead. Mom remains cancer-free. Very, very good. My question today pertains to my daughter's 9-month-old female golden doodle puppy named Uli. Blood work prior to spaying her showed elevated ALT enzymes, which are liver enzymes. So they postponed surgery. Their vet prescribed Denamarin for a few weeks and retested the pup's enzymes were several hundred higher, 400. Uli shows no other symptoms and appears to be happy and healthy otherwise. Do you believe astaxanthin could help lower her liver enzymes and prevent liver damage? It's very important that we figure out why her liver enzymes are going up. Could be parasitic in nature, could be heartworms, but there's other things that the vet should be considering. Now, the liver enzymes, when you give her ValAsta, the inflammation caused by whatever is creating this is going to drop those numbers pretty quickly. So it is going to help dramatically with lowering her ALT numbers. So it's definitely worth a shot. There's no downside to this at all. As a matter of fact, I had given it to all 3 of my dogs and actually stopped anal gland cancer in one of them, which I tell that story about. So no harm in trying, and it would probably have a major benefit. ASAF, I've been diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis about 14 years ago. I'm a 47-year-old male. My diet is extremely clean and healthy in general. I lead a very healthy lifestyle. I've been to many healers and tried many modalities, all natural. Some helped more than others. I've heard of you and your amazing product through Paul Neeson from Raw Life. I've listened to most of your YouTube videos. I've started taking ValAsta, 2 tablets, 8 pumps, once a day, 6 weeks ago. I guess that's when he started. I weigh 52 kilograms. I still experience swelling and joint pain. My blood test results after 5 weeks of ValAsta still show an ESR of 47, which is high, which is very high, and CRP of 23, which is also high. I don't know why these figures have not dropped after taking ValAsta. I've attached recent blood results. I would really appreciate if you could assist. Asaf, I have reviewed that your blood work. There's quite a bit that's out. Your ferritin level, for example, is very high, but your hemoglobin is low. These type of results in general look to be either viral related or you have an enzymatic inability to transfer the ferritin into the hemoglobin. So I would seriously look at this possibly being viral in nature. It is causing a pretty severe inflammatory response. In your case, your concentration primarily of the hydroxyl free radical is very high and being generated at a very high rate. And I would do 4 tablets with 4 pumps in each until you can get that CRP number to turn over, to start dropping from 23. Try to get it less than 3 if you can. But there's definitely something going on. Your doctor is going to have to address this as to why your ferritin isn't getting transferred into your hemoglobin. And the times that I've seen this happen has been usually viral related. We see it in COVID. We see it in herpes type viruses, cytomegaloviruses. We see it in HIV. So it is something to watch pretty carefully. Jim asked about Lexapro with Parkinson's. My wife has been taking 20 milligrams of Lexapro for many years. She's off of carbidopa, levodopa in 2019. This is this story altogether. Only drug she still takes is 20 milligrams of Lexapro nightly. Parkinson's doctor asked her if she wanted to quit taking Lexapro in 2006 when deep brain stimulators were installed. Answer was no. She has consumed various nutrients, protein products for many years. She works with a trainer 4 days a week at the gym. Been wondering if Lexapro could be getting in the way of the progress she is making with ValAsta. And 2, is there a ValAsta user group for Parkinson's? I'll answer 2 first. I'm not aware, but it's a great idea because we're seeing such success with the elimination of the tremors associated with Parkinson's. And I'm going to go through a little bit as to why we believe that ValAsta is stopping the Parkinson's tremors. Now, question number 1 is, I've been wondering if Lexapro could be getting in the way of the progress she is making with ValAsta. Lexapro is one of those, like Cymbalta and there's some others. They do have a tendency to decrease dopamine production in the brain, along with serotonin levels they can change. It is something to truly consider. Any sort of neuropsychotic medications do have a negative effect on dopamine, and they do can create an inflammatory response that would also have a negative effect on dopamine production. A lack of dopamine creates tremors, and that's how we sort of watch Parkinson's. Typically, they give you levodopa or carbidopa to make up for the dopamine that's being reacted away in your brain for whatever reason. But I'm going to go through some of those, what we have found recently with Parkinson's. Here's a research study. Researchers conducted a nested case control study using data from 2006 through 2015, collected by a large claims database in the U.S. Subjects with EPSs, which are, it's a name given to the prelude or the beginning of Parkinson's. The findings indicate that side effects of Cymbalta had the strongest association with users seeing a risk of Parkinson's disease and EPSs 5 times higher than those who did not take the drug. Romarin, Celexa, Lexapro, Paxil carried more than 3 times the risk. The risks with the rest of the drugs listed were more than doubled. So whenever you're dealing with a neurotransmitter type of a solution to Parkinson's, you're always going to, or with anxiety or depression, you're always going to be faced with this issue of dopamine suppression, which can over long term lead to Parkinson's. Susan C. Confused on what to eat. You have said on Ask Sam to just stay away from fructose and take ValAsta. Also sucrose, which means breads, nuts, pasta, chips, fruits, some vegetables. What in the world is safe? I tried a vegan diet and lost weight, so that didn't work. Could you be more specific on what are safe foods to eat? I'd really appreciate it. I enjoy Mexican food and Italian food, but again, they have sucrose. Let's deal with that one right now. Stay away from inflammatory foods. About 60 to 70% of all inflammation coming from food comes from fructose. Sucrose is 50% glucose and 50% fructose. So anytime that you can substitute stevia, for example, for the sweetness, that would be good. I'm not a big proponent of of cutting out foods, I want you to focus on those things that are inflammatory. So when we look at fructose, it is 70% of our daily diet. Unfortunately, it appears to be in just about everything. So we have to really evaluate where we are from an inflammatory disease state. The best way to do that is measure your C-reactive protein. If your C-reactive protein is less than 3, then you can eat a normal diet. You can eat these things. If that C-reactive protein is greater than 3, then you need to cut out your chips, your fruits, your fruit juices, your breads, and substitute with potatoes. Vegetables are fine. Eat as many vegetables as you want. The fructose content should always be maintained at less than 4 grams per 100 grams of food that you eat. That will help in keeping your inflammatory disease state low. The next part of this is I've been using salve a complete month, and the bumps aren't really doing anything on my breast, just more have come up. They kind of sting like a bee sting. Is this normal? And what can I expect to happen from here? On breast cancer, oftentimes we'll see the immune system kick in when you're on ValAsta, and it will calcify. It will kill whatever cells were there. Some of those cancer cells probably did not form a lump that you could feel or manipulate. But once you start taking ValAsta, your immune system will now recognize that through either a PD-L1 identification, a PD-L1 inhibition reaction, or through a necrotic reaction where the ValAsta will go in and actually kill the cancer cell through a pH change, an intracellular pH change. Once that happens and that dies, there's 2 ways that tissue can either be taken out. It can be broken down by the T cells, macrophages will chew them up, or if the quantity is too great or there's a cyst that was built around to isolate whether it's a bacteria or a foreign object like a splinter. But in some cases, the T cells and the macrophages will actually push it out closer to the skin if it can't dissolve it. And you'll see these bumps form. They might even turn red, and they'll pop up almost like a pimple. In most cases, they'll burst open, they'll seep, and then heal over. So it's typically necrotic tissue. Some of that, once this starts, may have been cancer cells that weren't even identified by a PET scan or a CAT scan. Could you explain how the salve works, and how long does the body take to eliminate round, hard nodules or abscesses? It can vary. It depends on, first of all, how deep the abscesses are. It depends on what the nodules are. If the nodules are part of the lymph nodes, then it has to be dissolved. Lymph nodes are like filters. So any sort of debris, bacteria gets caught in a lymph node, and the rate at which you pick those up and dispose of those can take several months to do that. It also depends on your adipose, your fat layers. The deeper that tissue, that fat or adipose tissue is, the longer it's going to take for them to be taken out. So you may feel those lumps there. The lumps being there are in most cases benign. They're not indicative or will cause any sort of further disease state. So it is something that is more of an aesthetic or an appearance issue, a nuisance issue, more than it is any life-threatening type of a disease. The salve works typically by going right through the dermis. There's a lot of capillaries on the dermis, the epidermis layers, and the DMSO, for example, that's in the DMSO salve carries right into those capillaries. So it's a quick way of getting entry of the astaxanthin into the bloodstream and into the surrounding tissue. If it is cancer related and it is, for example, melanoma or basal cell or a dermal sarcoma, then what can happen is that those cancer cells that are close are going to get a very high concentration of the astaxanthin without the astaxanthin being required to go through the system, through the blood system, to get to that tissue. It's a quicker way of application. The next one is dairy okay to consume? If you have breast cancer, some say milk, yogurt, cheese are inflammatory. However, I just read 2 reports that say they have anti-inflammatory effects. Confused in Texas. We can all be confused. So as long as your C-reactive protein is less than 3, you can pretty much eat whatever you want. But if you do consume large inflammatory diets, high inflammatory diets, you need to pick it up. I would suggest a C-reactive protein at least every 60 days. It would be nice when you start out to do it about every 30 days, just to match up what you're eating to what your inflammatory disease state is and get you much better control as to what you're doing. If you think that the food you're eating is something that you should stay away from and it's your human desire to eat it, chances are you probably shouldn't eat it. So that becomes a quick and easy rule of thumb. Maria, you write, can you please expand on the use of topical ValAsta paste as to the benefits, science, and dose, and how often to apply? Thanks. I'm hoping I covered that in the last question. It is a topical. It does very good on wound healing. It stops the destruction of a wound or a lesion on the surface. It allows it to heal much quicker. There's 2 things that are required in wound healing. The first one is you have to initiate a stem cell signal that allows cells to grow and split to close up the wound. When that happens, you create an inflammatory response. That inflammatory response will kill off a few of the good cells that you just created. We see this with burn victims where the cells begin to grow. They outgrow the ability to receive nutrients. The inflammatory response kills those cells. We have to debride the tissue and allow the cell growth to match up with the ability to provide nutrients to the cells. It's about as simple approach as I can explain on here. So if you can reduce the inflammatory response that actually kills cells, then the wound healing will happen faster. If the cells cannot get nutrients, you'll see that tissue die and it will back off to the rate at which it can get nutrients. That's what causes scarring, is typically those types of collagen formations that result in some scarring. The whole idea with the paste is that it is a rapidly absorbed, it's a means of administering the astaxanthin without going through an oral introduction. So it allows it to get carried directly to the capillaries on the surface of the skin. The astaxanthin will penetrate through. The DMSO will carry the astaxanthin into the tissue. And that science is pretty well known. It's you can look at DMSO type of effects. Some of the oils soften the tissue and allow quick migration into the phospholipid membranes of cells. So it's all good news. It's why we see skin soften when we add lotion. Typically on how often to apply, if it's a wound, I suggest changing the bandages once every 12 hours at a minimum. So if you bandage it cover it because the astaxanthin, if you use the astaxanthin oil directly, it's got a staining characteristic to it. But just be very careful and make sure there's no bacteria. I also suggest topical antibiotics like Neosporin, for example. Do not use hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide creates a peroxal irritant that actually kills cells. It's a very good disinfectant, and it kills bacteria, but you want to be very, very careful with peroxide use. I would prefer you use a antibacterial salve like Neosporin. Masha G. Hello, Sam. My husband has stage 4 neuroendocrine tumor in the pancreas with mets to the liver and spine. We have been on ValAsta for 2 months now. Since day one, he has been better every day. Yesterday, we had a CT done. It showed that all tumors have shrunk by 50% and the bone metastases have calcified, which means they are dead. Great news. However, on the CAT scan, the doctor mentioned that his tumors are dark, and usually they show up as white. But in his case, they are dark. We asked if this could be that the tumor is dead. He said yes, it could be, but he doesn't know for sure. He wants us to continue 3 more cycles of Captum oral chemo and then rescan. This is something that comes up very, very frequently. The current oncologists are not used to the fact or have seen the fact that the cancer dies, but it still shows up as a lesion. The fact that this remained dark, which meant there was no glucose uptake, and it depends on how the contrast is done, but typically it means that the cancer is no longer living or viable. The inflammatory response can create where the tumor was. There's going to be a scar. Typically, it's like a gunshot wound. You're going to have remnants of that cancer at that point. And the doctors have not seen these types of cures of disease when it relates to cancer. And that's something they very seldom talk about is the ability to cure a disease. In these cases here, they're reacting out of fear, out of something that they've not seen before. It's very common when using ValAsta that these same characteristics appear. So my point is that if he cannot tell you that that's viable cancer, the chemo danger is much higher than the chemo benefit. He has to be able to confirm to you that the cancer is still living. Otherwise, it's just inflammatory and benign, and you're no longer at risk. Would you know anything about the way tumors show up on CAT scan? Any thoughts on this? Yes, they usually light up. It's a measure of if it's done with radioactive sugars, like in a PET scan. The CAT scan itself is very definitive on measuring the size of it. A CAT scan cannot differentiate between an inflammatory response onto a cancer cell or the cancer cells itself, the tumor itself. So it is not possible for a doctor to differentiate when he sees, just from the CAT scan, if he sees an increase in tumor size, whether that's caused because of the immune system response creating an inflammatory response around the cancer, killing it, or is it the cancer itself growing? So what we have to rely on are the CA marker numbers. You can get a biopsy and they can look at those cells and they'll see some that are necrotic, some of them that may be alive. But a CAT scan alone cannot tell you whether you are definitive with cancer or whether it's just an inflammatory response causing the appearance of tumor growth. With that, I'm going to go to the next one. I hope that answered that question, and feel free to send more in if you like to clarify that. Desiree W., we spoke 3 weeks ago. I've been following your Facebook page. Know several women commenting on pain in the tumor site breast after taking ValAsta for 3 months or more. Some of them had markers go up. I am having the same pain, and although it is manageable with Advil, I go in tomorrow for full blood work, CA 153 and CRP. Been completely off all medications since February 23. Any comments on this? Okay, several things can be happening. When the cancer cells die, you get an inflammatory response, and that inflammatory response will try to dissolve or absorb or break down the protein structures of the cancer cell itself. If that is not done, then you, similar to getting an itch when a wound heals, the nerve endings now try to come back to life. And since they're not feeling that pressure, and you'll feel a little tinge maybe of pain or itch. Some people can't even differentiate between the pain and the itch. But it means primarily that your inflammatory response from your immune system is attacking it, has killed it, and now new tissue is forming through mitosis and beginning to repair what was done. Now, this curve that I'm showing here now, the blue curve is your CA markers with no intervention. If you just let cancer go over a period of time, and the time is just relative, so don't say that it's 8 months or 9 months or whatever, but it depends on the type of cancer and how quickly. Prostate cancer would have a different curve than this. But the whole point here is the orange curve is with intervention. So at that point of intervention, when you take ValAsta or you take chemo, you may see a very sharp increase. Now, the reaction to that increase by current oncology is, oh my golly, the cancer's out of control. We have to increase the dose of your chemo. The reality is, no, you don't. What that means is that the cancer cells have died. All of the cancer antigens have been pumped out into your system in a very short period of time. So the concentration increases, and we see that concentration. Without any further intervention at that point, you'll see your CA numbers start to drop off and become normal, and the cancer is now dead. So the panic that goes in, the fear that goes in when you see your CA numbers increase, oftentimes are misread, and the action resulting from that is quite dangerous. So be very, very cautious of this. The inappropriate use of chemo and radiation has a tendency to hurt people more than the disease itself. So please, please be very cognizant of this and very aware of this. Yuri S., thank you for your helpful videos. My question is about increasing bioavailability of ValAsta since capsules get dissolved in the stomach in less than 5 minutes. Would so-called delay-release capsules be a better choice for protecting ValAsta from being partially destroyed by stomach acid? Okay, the capsules themselves dissolve pretty readily. The whole idea is to reduce some of the acid in the stomach to keep it from reacting. The hydrogen ions, the H pluses, will have a tendency to sneak a few of the electrons off of the astaxanthin, and it'll form water and neutralize some of the astaxanthin. So that's the reason we put it in capsules. It being in an oil base, the hydrochloric acid in the stomach has a very difficult time getting through the liposomal form of the ValAsta. So I'm not sure it's worth all of this effort. You can never get to zero acid in your stomach, so there will always be excess hydrogen ions in there. I have no evidence to show that putting in an antacid type product would help with the absorption of the ValAsta. It's primarily the oil that does the protecting, because the hydrogen ions do not penetrate the lipid concentration, the lipid droplets that the ValAsta is in. So to answer the question, I don't have any evidence one way or the other to say it will help or it won't help. I just know that it does make it into the small bowel, and it is bioavailable at that point. Sandra A. I've been taking ValAsta astaxanthin for 35 days now and feel great. So wonderful. In fact, I just ordered the 100 ml bottle a few days ago. Then suddenly I've developed a rash. Looks like a heat rash, but very itchy. Has anyone else complained about this? I see my doctor again in 1 month and will also speak with her about this, but I'm wondered if anything else has developed a rash or if it could be something else I'm going through. I want to take the info to her if there's a rash also. I really don't want to stop this program because I feel so good. My doctor was impressed with the progress I've made since starting this program. I am now off my blood pressure medication and am being weaned off my insulin per my doctor. It is not shingles, as there is no pain, and I've had my shingles shot. Let me know, please, if you have a moment. We've had, I can count on one hand, a number of complaints where people have come in and said that they got some form of a rash. We've been able to narrow most of those down to something other than the ValAsta. I am not aware of anything that is in the ValAsta, unless you have a sensitivity to the olive oil, which is it's the highest grade olive oil that exists on the planet. It comes from Morocco. Very high purity Mediterranean olive oil. So we don't have any reason to suspect that the rash is coming from the ValAsta. In most cases, it was from something that they ate. It was from a heat rash or even poison ivy in a couple cases. But if your rash is not going away as you're on ValAsta, then I would suggest that you go off of it. It could be an histamine reaction from something else, but you can always go off of it and or reduce the dose, which is probably what I would do. But typically, with an allergic reaction to something like what you're explaining here, it only gets progressively worse. If it's the ValAsta and you continue taking the ValAsta, the rash should get worse each and every day. But if it is something that just happened in your life, that maybe shrimp, maybe iodine, I don't know whether you have something that you ate. Now there is no iodine in the ValAsta, but it's probably caused by another food group of some sort. But stay in touch and let me know if it continues. Tim O'Shea, what is the best way to take ValAsta at the end of the meal, with the meal, or away from food? This is one of those that's been asked and answered a lot of times. Always take it with food, and it just helps with the absorption and the immediate passing into the small bowel, which is where it's absorbed. Also, do other supplements, medicines affect ValAsta, like ivermectin, curcumin, berberine, melatonin, iodine, potassium iodine, fenbendazole? We're not aware of any other contraindications. We do know that some vitamins increase the hydroxyl free radical concentration, which requires ValAsta to be consumed at a much higher rate. Curcumin and turmeric are anti-inflammatories. They are 1/20th of the ORAC score of ValAsta on the same number of milligrams. 1/20th. So it's only 5% effective. All of these things could be replaced with ValAsta. Some of these, like ivermectin or fenbendazole, can also have a negative effect on the liver. But do those things or take those things that are not pro-oxidants. For example, vitamin C is a pro-oxidant, vitamin A is a pro-oxidant, vitamin E is a pro-oxidant. What that means is that when they're metabolized in the liver to process them, they create an inflammatory response. So that can very quickly deplete the effects that you would see from ValAsta and actually raise your C-reactive protein levels. Connor S. ADT, androgen deprivation therapy. Stage 4 metastatic cancer. Spread to pubic bone, spine L2. Last October, PSA was 98. Started ADT. 14 days. Injected 14 days. To be repeated every 6 months. My PSA 2 weeks ago read less than 0.01, which is very good. That is very good, but not totally unexpected with the infusions. After about 2 months, side effects started, but the side effects are horrific: feeling lethargic, low energy, and terrible joint pains. I'm not going to repeat the ADT. I understand that it reduced or killed my testosterone. That's what it does. Will I have to live with this, or will the side effects of ADT wear off? I'm taking ValAsta for the last 3 months, now up to 18 pumps a day. When should I see results? My doctor, oncologist, is no help as I have refused chemotherapy and radiation. I would really monitor your PSA at least monthly to get a trend. As your testosterone levels come back, we see this with weightlifters, for example, who take steroids. They end up with really some very bad, horrific side effects later on in life as a result of that. But as they've killed the testosterone production, you want to make sure that that production is somewhat coming back normally, or it's at a reduced level. The ValAsta will stop the inflammation associated with prostate cancer, which is sort of what I think that he's referring to here when he's measuring a PSA. ValAsta should stop it. You've got a pretty good head start here. Some of these are going to be when they're processed. The Casodex, for example, when it's processed in the liver, creates a pretty severe inflammatory response. I'd monitor your C-reactive protein and your PSA, and I wouldn't do the chemo or radiation. You can always use that. It's going to has some pretty negative side effects to it, and these types of prostate cancers are something to watch. Another one to watch for is alkaline phosphatase, and that number you want to keep less than 120. It's indicative of the cancer in the bone. If that number is over 120, that means you have mets to the bone and your bone is dissolving. If that number is less than 120, you're okay. So the 3 important blood tests that you ask your doctor to run routinely is going to be PSA, alkaline phosphatase, and C-reactive protein. Catherine, hi, my colon cancer was originally diagnosed in the colon, 2013, 2019 it returned a lymph node outside of the colon. It had major surgery, chemo. However, the tumor was too close to the mesenteric vein and artery to get it all, and it returned in January this year. I just started undergoing chemo for this because the tumors were wrapped around my mesenteric artery and vein is not operable at this time. I just had my second chemo treatment yesterday, and I'm also taking some pre-purposed drugs, metformin, doxycycline, mebendazole, and atorvastatin. Would I be able to take your supplement along with these? I appreciate any information. The metformin, I'm a little curious as to why that's on there, but I don't have enough information here. But anyways, the ValAsta there's no contraindication with any of these. ValAsta works off of a different pathway. You'll probably see the tumor. As a matter of fact, we're finding in most cases now where the chemo, there is a report out on gemcitabine used with the astaxanthin, and it had a extreme kill rate on pancreatic cancer. So there is some synergistic effect between some of the chemo drugs and the astaxanthin because they work in separate pathways. So you have a 2 attack on the cancer, and the cancer can't survive that. So a dual attack using ValAsta appears to be quite beneficial. But there is no contraindication with anything that you have listed here that I can see. Andrea, before I begin my first bottle beginning May, I had blood work done. My A1C was 5.5. I did blood panel on June 1st. My A1C is now 6.4, which puts me in a diabetic range. Can the ValAsta cause this to happen? The answer is no. It's usually diet related, and it could be dehydration related or hydration related. I have been on a no dairy, gluten-free, low carb, low sugar diet since December 2021. I'm not sure what's going on. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Typically, what's doing the A1C, A1C is an average. So there's something in your diet. It could be, and it's hyperglycemic, which means that there's something, either excess fruit, bread, for example, will do it. Pasta will do it. Glucose is a hyperglycemic sugar. So anything with those products in it, simple volume of food also has a concern. So it's probably more diet related than it is ValAsta related. Make sure that you're also taking the right amount, that you are in a position, if you increase the dose of the ValAsta, in all cases that we've seen so far, A1C drops for type 2 diabetics very, very quickly. It does not work on type 1, but there's something that extraneous to the ValAsta is elevating your 6.4. There's nothing in the ValAsta that would cause that to happen that we know of. I'm planning to get off the ValAsta for a while. However, I just ordered a new bottle. I did take it out of the box and have it stored in my cabinet for whenever my first bottle is empty. How long do I have before I can return it? Once you're going to have to call in and have them send you whatever the return policy is. Once it's out of the package, I believe it's difficult for us to take it back without some sort of a stocking fee, because we have to go in and get it checked and make sure that it is in fact not been tampered with, and we have to do a QC test when we do that. But call in and check with what that policy is. Parkinson's. I'm going to talk about Parkinson's, and we have hundreds of people that are taking this now for Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and MS. And we also have amyloidosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, and some of the amyloid beta protein misfolding reactions that are happening. But I'm going to focus here on Parkinson's for right now. Our previous understanding up to this point was that Parkinson's was caused by a lack of dopamine production in the substantia nigra of the brain. And when the dopamine production drops off, we get the tremors issues and the cloudiness, the hallucinations. Dopamine is one of those that regulates our ability to stay in reality. So it's a very important neurotransmitter molecule. Now, Up until this point, we thought that the brain no longer produced dopamine, and that's why people got Parkinson's, or there was some damage to the substantia nigra part of the brain. What we have found now, which several universities and research centers are looking at, is that it may not be a lack of dopamine. It may be due to an oxidative stress or the reaction of the dopamine with a hydroxyl free radical to form oxydopamine. Oxydopamine is a molecule that we would give to animals to give them Parkinson's so that we could test Parkinson's medications on. And what we find is the oxydopamine to dopamine ratio in the brain is very high, or much higher than normal in Parkinson's patients. So it now turns out, and the NIH has several research papers on this, that it turns out that Parkinson's is stress related, oxidative stress related. So the hydroxyl free radical crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it will react with dopamine and form oxydopamine. And when that happens, you are now diagnosed with Parkinson's. So let me show you a little bit as to why this is. So if you reduce the production of oxydopamine, you should reduce your disease state. And the way you do that is you reduce the hydroxyl free radical, which we think is the culprit. But there may be some other reactive oxygen species like singlet oxygen, the peroxyl non-radical, and the superoxide, which highly reactive. And if you're genetically not producing superoxide dismutase, which is the enzyme that neutralizes superoxide, so it can be a genetic link too, but the ValAsta neutralizes all four of those. And what we have found in most of these cases now is that they see a substantial improvement in their ability to sleep. No more hallucinations. Their tremors stop. So we know we're on the right path. Let me go through exactly. That's dopamine there. You can see how it has one terminus end with a nitrogen with an amine group and the two hydroxyl groups on the end. That is dopamine. But when dopamine reacts with a hydroxyl free radical, it adds another OH. So instead of that benzene ring having just two OHs, it now has three. And it takes away the functionality of dopamine as a neurotransmitter. We think this is the actual chemistry, the biochemical side of why people now are getting Parkinson's. So if we reduce that hydroxyl free radical concentration in the brain, then Parkinson's can actually be prevented. This is from Mary. I'm 65 years old and on no medications. Several years ago, I was told I was type 2 diabetic due to my A1C being 7. Since my mother was type 2, doctors said it was inevitable for me since type 2 was hereditary. Well, your doctor's wrong. You might be predisposed for it, but it's not, there is no inevitability to you getting type 2 diabetes. That is absolutely wrong. And it should never have been said. Now, type 1 is a little different, but type 2 is not something everyone is predisposed because their grandparents had it. She's refused medication, metformin, and changed my diet. A1C went down to 5.7. Great news. My question is, I've been taking ValAsta twice a week just to maintain good health. I also take a product every day called Texas Superfoods, which contains multiple vitamins. Is this a smart thing to do? Type 2 diabetes is caused by a misfolding, and I'm going to expand on this because this really offends me when I see doctors making these comments. They know nothing about what they're talking about. Type 2 diabetes is preventable in 100% of the cases. it is preventable. So this was totally unprofessional for this doctor to make this comment. Now, with the Texas superfoods, they usually contain a lot of vitamins. These vitamins can be pro-oxidants. They will put pressure on your pancreas and on your liver, and they can add to your type 2 diabetes. ValAsta neutralizes those free radicals resulting from the processing of, like, vitamin C, for example, vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin E. So be very, very careful. If you're not short a vitamin, then taking more is not necessarily good. As a matter of fact, it can be very unhealthy. Vitamin D is one of those, in light of where we are with the COVID, that I really like everyone to really take the vitamin D. In the Black community, please take vitamin D. It is something that over 80% of those in the Black community are short vitamin D, and I highly recommend that it be taken as a supplement every day. Now, with that, I'm going to go through some of the things here about diabetes, because this has come up quite frequently. Type 2 diabetes, 79 million people a year. Type 8 million people with type 2. Type 1, about 3 million children and adults. So you can see the disparity. Very few people have type 1 compared to type 2. This is ValAsta diabetes results to date. 72% of all participants are off of metformin or medications. 81% of participants have seen over 50% reduction in insulin usage. So you have to watch this very carefully when you're taking ValAsta, because your blood sugars will tend towards normality. You don't give insulin to people who have normal A1Cs or glucose levels. So you got to be very, very careful that you don't go out the bottom end if you're taking insulin and or metformin. And this is what causes type 2 diabetes. It's not hereditary, necessarily hereditary. Typically, what happens is the insulin that's produced gets misfolded. So when insulin is produced, it looks more like a string, a piece of spaghetti. And then what happens, it goes in and it is folded. So it begins to fold up into a wad, like a paper wad. This is insulin. Now, insulin, when it folds perfectly, has only one reactive site, or maybe two reactive sites. After all that folding of that big long piece of spaghetti, it's all wadded up. These are the only two end groups that would fit inside of a receptor. You can see that or not. Fits inside. Now, if this insulin protein touches a reactive oxygen species like superoxide, the hydroxyl free radical or singlet oxygen, or even the nitrogen-based, they're called RNS, it'll do this. It'll misfold, and it'll become more like a piece of spaghetti again. Now, the reactive site of this is spread over a much larger area, so it cannot make contact with the receptor in the proper location. So it never gets transmitted, the electrical signal never gets transmitted to the cell membrane to open up the glucose channels to allow sugar to flow from your bloodstream into the cells. So that's just a small demonstration of how this works. If you eliminate the reactive oxygen species, you can stop your type 2 diabetes within a week. We see it within 30 days. People are coming off of their meds. So it is not predestined that all four of my grandparents, my brother and my sister, are all type 2 diabetics. I am not. And I know exactly why they were diabetic. And if you eliminate or keep your C-reactive protein less than 3, you can stop type 2 diabetes. Here's the way it works. The ROS comes in, there's a chain reaction, oxidative stress. You end up with a lot of things. You can have lipid peroxidation, you can have oxidative damage, membrane damage, the cell will come apart, the DNA breaks, then you get necrosis or apoptosis, which is cell death. I'm going to show you a little bit as to what happens when an insulin molecule comes down to the surface of a cell. Here in the yellow, you'll see the insulin molecules. You'll see the insulin receptor on the cell membrane. That insulin molecule has to fit inside those 3 little fingers of the insulin receptor perfectly. Now, if that insulin molecule is misfolded from its attachment to the hydroxyl free radical, lo and behold, it can't make contact. If it can't make contact, in orange and red here are the glucose channels. The electrical signal is not transmitted. Those glucose channels cannot open up to allow sugar to flow from your bloodstream into the cell. So here's a normal cell operation. You have glucose operating in the bloodstream up here, floating around. You ate a candy bar, Snickers bar. It triggers the pancreas to produce insulin, which fits inside the receptor perfectly if it's normal. This sends an electric signal internal to the cell, comes over, cracks open or opens this gate. It's called a glucose channel. Allows the glucose to enter into that channel. It fits perfectly by its shape. Closes here, opens up, the glucose channel then comes into the cell, and your cells can now use it for energy. Here's how normal insulin works. The insulin molecule itself, perfectly formed, makes contact with the insulin receptor, sends an electric pulse, opens up the glucose channel, the sugar goes into the cell. Here's a ROS destruction of pancreatic beta cells that can result in type 1 diabetes. If your beta cells die, your islets of Langerhans in the pancreas die, you're going to be a type 1 diabetic because you can no longer produce insulin. And this is how it happens from ROS, from reactive oxygen species. It will dissolve the cell membrane. It will destroy the mitochondria in here. And it will react, which I'm not sure that it's showing here, but it will cause the complete death of the beta cells in the islets of Langerhans. Here's one that is misfolded. This insulin molecule has a slight imperfection. It cannot make full contact with the receptor. If it cannot make full contact with the receptor, there is no electrical charge. The glucose channels remain closed. If the glucose channels remain closed, the cell begins to starve. The cell will release an enzyme called leptin to the brain. Leptin tells the brain, I need you to eat a Snickers bar right now. Raise the blood sugar level. By increasing the concentration gradient, the body is trying to force glucose into the cells. This creates an inflammatory response, and typically these cells will then die. That's why people lose weight that are diabetics. Their cells are dying. Not enough insulin. This is type 1 diabetes. If there's no insulin but plenty of glucose, and there's no insulin to attach here, it's the same thing. You can't get the sugar intracellular. It stays on the outside of the cell. Here's some of the sugars that I'm going to focus on here. Glucose, and this is just a chemical identification as to what it is. But let me show you a little bit. Glucose looks like this. This sugar is used by every cell in your body. This is the main food source for our body. Fructose over here, on the other hand, is not used by a single cell in our body. This is classified as a poison. Fructose is, by definition, a poison. Here is table sugar, one molecule of glucose attached through a glucosidic bond to one molecule of fructose. When you eat table sugar, this bond breaks, uses that for energy for every cell in your body. This one here goes and gives you high cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, by the way, and also high triglycerides, and it's stored as fat. So typically this molecule goes to the pancreas, it's converted into triglycerides. When triglycerides hit somewhere around 400 milligrams per liter, the liver converts the triglycerides into LDL cholesterol, which gets deposited in cell membrane and is the primary source of amyloidosis diseases like Lou Gehrig's disease and other organ amyloidosis type diseases. This is starch or polysaccharides. Polysaccharides just means many, which is what poly means. Saccharides means sugars. So many sugar units. This is actually a plastic called starch. So when you have one unit attached to another, that's called a dimer. When you have many of these, they're called polymers. Many mers. Mers means units. So this is typically a glucosidic form or a starch form of glucose. And this can be stored as glycogen in the liver. And as you sleep, about 4 o'clock in the morning, between 3 and 5, people come awake. It's because you haven't had anything to eat. The liver will convert this glycogen into glucose to start feeding cells and providing enough energy for you to come awake in the morning. But you don't see any fructose here, do you? There is none. Here's fructose conversion to ROS. Fructose enters the cell, goes to the mitochondria. In the conversion of acetyl coenzyme A, you generate ROS, and a lot of ROS. You can see the reactive oxygen species all coming over. When we're young, we produce peroxisomes that can neutralize the peroxides. Anytime we are iron-based and oxygen-based, we're going to generate ROS. Fructose, like I said, cannot be used by the body, but it does form fat deposits. And this is what gives us atherosclerosis, plaquing formations in the arteries, all from fructose. Here is the hydroxyl free radical, OH with a 0 charge. It's what's called a conjugate acid, has a pH of 5.8. Anything less than 7 is an acid. Anything greater than 7 is an alkaline. The way that these free radicals, which have 0 charges, when they pick up an electron, typically from ValAsta, for example, ValAsta donates a lot of electrons and can also absorb electrons, but it typically donates them. It becomes an OH minus 1. This is called a hydroxyl ion. This shoots the pH up over 11 and will kill most cells. Since cancer cells generate a very high concentration of the hydroxyl free radical, we see this preferential reaction inside the cancer cell, thereby killing the cancer cell very, very quickly. Reactive oxygen species, because we breathe oxygen. Oxygen is the poison. I find it quite humorous when people are trying to eliminate carbon dioxide, which is only 400 parts per million in the atmosphere. Oxygen is 200,000 parts per million. Oxygen is what's going to kill all of us. It's not CO2. So we have sort of a a group of uninformed, uneducated persons that are promoting the wrong message. But it is these oxygen species that cause human disease. This one we've talked about a lot. Antioxidants are saving grace. The antioxidants can make this reaction happen. When we're young, we have glutathione, a sulfur-based product that can donate electrons and remain stable. As we get in, for women age 42 and older, men age 50 and older, glutathione production drops off by as much as 90 to 95%. So we're headed for an inflammatory disease death. It's nature's way of taking us out. ValAsta is 22 times more potent than glutathione. So we can offset these inflammatory diseases now and prevent them from ever occurring. Prevention is the name of the game. Here's when oxidative phosphorylation happens. If you exercise anaerobically, you're going to generate a huge concentration of these reactive oxygen species. It causes the formation of lactic acid with runners and marathon runners. Anytime that you go anaerobic, you're going to generate a very high concentration. So with marathon runners, for example, the highest concentration of a single exercising group of melanoma cases is found in marathon runners. It's not because they're exposed to sunlight. The melanoma is showing up in places where the sun doesn't shine, and it's caused by these reactive oxygen species. When the blood supply is redirected from the surface of the skin to keep the organs of the brain and the muscle working, the skin goes into an anaerobic state, increasing the ROS concentration in the skin, and some of those cells that are deprived of oxygen die through apoptosis, but some are converted into cancer cells, and that's why we get melanoma and basal cell carcinomas. The rest of this I've already spoken about diabetes. This is how the astaxanthin can activate the insulin receptor. So that energy of the astaxanthin does two things. It can fit inside the insulin receptor and activate it electrically, and it can also donate electrons to neutralize the hydroxyl free radical that actually causes the misfolding of the insulin protein. These two mechanisms appear to be very, very positive in eliminating type 2 diabetes. With that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to run out of time here. Just as a quick note, we've seen some progress on insulin resistance in type 1 diabetics. It's not substantial. It probably is statistically significant simply because even type 1 diabetics have some insulin resistance. So if they are taking injections of insulin, we see their insulin requirements drop slightly by as much as 40%, even on type 1s. And so it is something to consider. I don't have enough information to really go into is it statistically significant for type 1 diabetics, but it most assuredly can stop type 2 and keep you from ever getting type 2 diabetes. And with that, I'm going to close, and please continue the questions coming in. These are great questions, and they're on the tip of everybody's tongue that is suffering from one of these diseases. So send your questions into AskSam at ValAsta.net. And we're going to keep doing this every week and try to bring in whatever questions you have. Hopefully they're not being repeated. I don't want to waste too much time in repeating them, but let's keep this going. Thank you very much for your questions, and I hope this has helped. Thank you.